My family kept leaving me out of every holiday dinner, so I finally stopped showing up. Then they accused me of abandoning the family at a wedding I wasn't invited to. It still sounds ridiculous even typing it out. Because for years I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. People forget things, plans change, families get messy. But when it kept happening over and over, I started to realize I wasn't being forgotten. I was being excluded. And the worst part is that everyone acted like I was the one being difficult for noticing. The first time I really questioned it was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. My mom posted photos of the dinner before I even knew it was happening. Everyone was there. My parents, my older sister Lee, her husband, even my aunt and cousins. I remember staring at the pictures in disbelief because I had spoken to my mom that morning. Not once did she mention dinner. When I called her, she laughed like I was overreacting and said it was just a small thing and we assumed you were busy. That line became a pattern. We assumed you were busy. Except I wasn't, I was just not included. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe group chats didn't include me by accident. Maybe there was some unspoken scheduling confusion. But then Christmas came, and then New Year's. And then birthdays started happening without me being told until after the fact. Each time the explanation shifted slightly, but the outcome never changed. I wasn't there, and they didn't seem to think it mattered. The most confusing part was how normal they acted when I did see them, like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't missed anything. Like I wasn't supposed to feel left out of my own family. My sister Lee especially acted like I was imagining things. She would say things like, "You know how chaotic mom is with planning," or "It's not that deep." But it did feel deep, because it wasn't once or twice. It was every single holiday for years. At some point I stopped bringing it up, because every time I did, I ended up feeling like I was being dramatic. My mom would sigh and say I was creating tension. My dad would go quiet like he didn't want to get involved. And Lee would change the subject immediately, so I started observing instead of reacting, and what I noticed made it worse. There were group chats I wasn't in, separate plans made without me, inside jokes I wasn't part of, even small things like restaurant reservations that somehow never had my name on them. It wasn't chaos, it was coordination. One year I actually asked my dad directly why I wasn't included in Christmas dinner. He hesitated for a long time before saying, "Your mom thought it would be easier this way." Easier for who? I didn't ask out loud, but I stopped feeling like there was an innocent explanation after that. The breaking point didn't happen loudly. It happened quietly. Last year I waited for Thanksgiving invite that never came. I didn't call, I didn't ask, I just watched. And sure enough, the photos came again. Same table, same people, same absence of me. That's when something in me shifted, not anger exactly, more like clarity. If I wasn't being invited, then I couldn't be expected to show up. So I stopped pretending I was part of it. I stopped asking. I stopped checking. I stopped making myself available for a family that didn't seem to make space for me. And that's when things changed. Not in the way I expected. At first, there was silence. No one reached out. No one asked where I was. It felt like confirmation of everything I suspected. But then the messages started, passive at first. "My mom misses you at dinners. We barely see you anymore. You've been distant lately." Distant, that word kept showing up, as if I was the one who had pulled away from something I was actively excluded from. I remember replying once, saying I hadn't been invited. Lee responded with, "You always take things the wrong way." That sentence stuck with me longer than I expected, because I started wondering if they actually believed that, or if it was just easier to frame it that way. The real twist came months later when my cousin announced her wedding. I found out through social media. Again, everyone in the family was tagged, except me. No message, no explanation, nothing. I stared at that post for a long time, waiting for the follow-up message that would say it was a mistake. It never came. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt done. I didn't argue. I didn't ask. I just accepted that I wasn't part of whatever version of family they were building. So I stopped showing up emotionally, too. No more checking in. No more initiating conversations. No more pretending I was included in something I wasn't. 2 months later, I got a message from my mom. It said, "Are you seriously ignoring us now?" I remember laughing a little when I read it, because from her perspective, that's what it looked like. Not that I had been excluded for years, but that I had suddenly decided to disappear. I replied simply, "You didn't invite me to anything anyway." She didn't respond for 3 days. When she did, it was short. "We thought you didn't care about family gatherings anymore." That sentence felt like a rewrite of history, like all the missed holidays had been reframed into my choice. I didn't respond after that. For a while, things were quiet again, too quiet. Then came the wedding. The one I wasn't invited to, but somehow still became the place where I was publicly blamed for everything. It was my uncle's daughter's wedding, a big family event. I only knew about it because someone I used to be close to sent me a picture from it. They looked surprised I wasn't there. That's how I knew I wasn't the only one noticing my absence anymore. A week later, I got a call from Lee. not a message. A call which already felt unusual. Her tone was tight. She didn't even say hello properly. She just said, "You didn't have to embarrass Mom like that." I was confused. Embarrass her how? That's when she told me what had happened at the wedding. Apparently, during a toast, someone mentioned how sad it is when family members drift away. And somehow the conversation shifted. People started talking about me, about how I never show up anymore. How I chose to distance myself. How I don't prioritize family. I sat there listening, completely stunned, because I hadn't been there, I hadn't been invited, yet I was the topic of discussion at a family wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. When I pointed that out, Lee got defensive immediately. She said, "It wasn't personal, it just came up." But then she added something that changed everything. "Mom told everyone you were too busy to come anyway." That was the moment I realized something deeper was going on. It wasn't just exclusion. It was narrative control. They hadn't just left me out. They had explained my absence in a way that made me look like the one who pulled away. And now, in their version of events, I was the problem. I asked Lee directly, "Why wasn't I invited to the wedding?" There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, "We didn't think you'd want to come after everything." After everything, as if I had done something, as if I had caused distance instead of responding to it. That was when I stopped being confused and started being angry. Not loud anger, quiet, steady anger. The kind that makes you see patterns you ignored before. I started thinking back through every holiday, every excuse, every "we assumed you were busy." And I realized none of it ever included a real reason, just assumptions, convenient ones. A few days later, my dad finally called me. He sounded tired. He said, "Your mom feels like you've abandoned the family." That word again, abandoned. I asked him calmly, "When exactly was I included?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It's complicated." That was the first honest thing anyone had said to me, because it was complicated, but not in the way they were implying. Over the next few weeks, pieces started falling into place. Small things I had ignored before, like how every holiday plan seemed to be finalized in conversations I wasn't part of. How invitations always got lost for me but never for anyone else. How even when I was physically nearby, I was somehow never in the main plans. Then I had coffee with my cousin's friend who had attended the wedding. Completely unrelated conversation at first. But then she mentioned something casually that made everything click. She said, "It was weird you weren't there. Your mom said you were traveling." Traveling? I hadn't been anywhere. That's when I realized my absence wasn't being explained as forgetfulness anymore. It was being actively justified. I wasn't excluded. I was being rewritten. When I confronted my mom about it, she didn't deny it. Not directly. She just said we didn't want people asking questions. And there it was, the real motive. It wasn't about forgetting me. It was about presentation, about keeping the family image clean, about avoiding uncomfortable explanations at events. Apparently, it was easier to say I was busy, or traveling, or distant, than to admit I wasn't invited, because that would raise questions. Questions they didn't want to answer, especially questions about why my sister Lee was always included in everything and I wasn't. When I asked her that directly, she finally admitted something small, not dramatic, not emotional, just honest in a way that hurt more than anything else. She said, "Mom worries you don't fit in with everyone the same way Lee does." It wasn't even about behavior or conflict. It was about perception, about comfort, about image. Lee was easier to present, more socially aligned with the family gatherings, more consistent, more together in their eyes and me. I was the variable they quietly removed from the equation. Not because I did anything wrong, but because it was easier. That realization didn't feel like closure. It felt like distance forming permanently. I told them I wasn't going to keep arguing about it because there was nothing left to argue. Either I was included or I wasn't, and for years the answer had already been clear. After that, things changed again, but not reconciliation, not repair, just acceptance of separation. They stopped pretending I was busy and started calling me hard to reach, which somehow still framed me as the problem. I stopped correcting them. At the next family event I wasn't invited to, which I only found out about afterward, I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance. Lee texted me once saying, "You really hurt Mom by not showing up at the wedding events." I didn't respond, because by then I finally understood something simple. I hadn't abandoned them. I had just stopped participating in a version of family I was only included in after the fact. And that version of me they kept describing at the wedding, the one who chose distance, the one who stopped caring, that wasn't me. It was a story they needed to believe to make their choices easier to live with. The last time I saw my family was unplanned. I ran into my dad briefly in a store. He looked unsure whether to approach me. We talked for maybe 2 minutes. He asked if I was coming to the next holiday dinner. I told him I hadn't been invited. He sighed and said, "You know how things are." And I realized in that moment that how things are was exactly the problem. Nothing had changed. No one had fixed anything. They had just learned to live with the version of reality they created. I walked away from that conversation knowing I would probably never be part of those dinners again. And strangely, that felt less like loss and more like clarity, because the truth was simple. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't busy. I wasn't distant. I was just never truly included. And the only reason it became a problem was when I stopped pretending it didn't matter.